100 years ago, one heard the same kinds of comments about the American family that one hears today. In short, that the American family is disintegrating. Now, proof of this disintegration at the end of the 19th century included 3 points: the declining birth rate, a rising divorce rate, and evidence that women weren't completely content with their domestic role. Now, it's a little surprising to me that that same claim about the family is being made today, that it's disintegrating. And often the same points are mentioned as proof: the declining birth rates, increased divorce rates, and the discontent of women with domestic roles. Now, in no way do I mean to imply that cultural, demographic, and economic conditions are the same now as they were 100 years ago. On the contrary, the very nature of the family has changed drastically in the last 50 years, not to mention the last 100 years. But I don't think the average person's concept of the family has changed very much over the years. A lot of people have one fixed idea of the family: a married couple where the mother stays home to care for the children and father works. But this idea is challenged by what we see every day in U.S. society. To be sure, the family is a very sensitive barometer for what's happening in society, the culture, and the economy of the United States. To make this point clearer, we'll take a look at how the American family has changed in the last 50 years by looking at 3 different time periods. They are the mid-1940s to the mid-1960s, the mid-60s to the mid-80s, and finally the present. Sociologist Barbara Defoe Whitehead labels these 3 periods the period of traditional familism, the period of individualism, and the period of the new familism. I'll try for each period to show how economic, demographic, and cultural elements interact and in turn affect the family. Well, let's proceed in chronological order and start with traditional familism. Now, we're talking here of the 20 years from the mid-1940s to the mid-1960s. This was the period after World War II, a period characterized by a very strong economy. And this gave the United States a rising standard of living and a growing middle class. Now, demographically, the predominant configuration of the family from these years was the traditional one: a married couple with children. Some women worked, but divorce rates were low and birth rates were high. I guess you could say that the country idealized the family in these years. And what I mean is there was a commitment to the family from its members and a reverence for it from society. TV programs of the era depicted the family in the classical configuration: working father, housewife, and children. Now, culturally, 3 characteristics stand out in this period: conformity to social norms, greater male domination of the family than in the later periods, and clear-cut gender roles. That is, clear and separate roles for men and women at home and at work. Well, things have changed quite a bit after this period. Let's move on to the second period, the period of individualism. This period is from the mid-1960s to the mid-1980s. Now, because individualism is so often mentioned in our discussions of U.S. culture and people, I should make a little detour here before we discuss it. Individualism brings to mind 2 other words: independence and self-reliance. Individualism conveys the idea that one should think and act for himself or herself according to what feels right. Individualism is easily confused with egotism or selfishness. But in its best sense, it's much more. Now, individualism implies that one has the freedom to decide what's best rather than allowing that decision to be made by a group, such as the community or society. Individualism does, of course, conflict with the concept of community, which implies that the group shares in making decisions. And this conflict between the individual and the community is one that comes up again and again in our lecture series about the United States. All right, now let's get back to our discussion about the family. The second period, the period of individualism, saw three important social and political movements. Do you have any idea which movements I might be talking about? Keep in mind that these decades were characterized by a lack of conformity to social norms. Well, the movements I have in mind are the sexual revolution, in which sex was clearly no longer reserved for marriage, the women's liberation movement, and the movement against the war in Vietnam. All three movements, the sexual revolution, women's liberation, and the anti-war movement, were typical of the non-conforming nature of these decades. Now, culturally, it is in this period where we see two important developments. One, the idealization of one's career and work, and two, the drive for self-expression and self-fulfillment. In this period, the feminist movement challenged traditional gender roles and male domination of society. Women began to enter professions previously closed to them, like medicine, law, and management. Men, for their part, began at least to consider a more active role in raising their children. Now, these cultural changes occurred during a time of economic changes, too. This was a time of rapidly rising cost of living. Together, these forces changed the demographics of the family. The former picture of the family had only one configuration, a married couple with children where mother stayed home. The new picture of the family had to include new configurations, like families in which the husband and wife both worked, families of single parents with children, and families of cohabiting couples with or without children. With more women pursuing careers and making money, there was less economic pressure for them to stay in unsuitable marriages. Therefore, divorce rates doubled in a decade. Rising divorce rates and more financial independence for women made marriage a less attractive arrangement for many women. And consequently, the number of single-parent households tripled. Now, less conformity to social norms paved the way for cohabitation. So the number of unmarried couples living together in this period quadrupled. Now, can you see how economic, cultural, and demographic aspects of the society interact with each other? I hope so. Well, let's continue with our agenda. The third period, the new familism. Now, this is harder to see because we're living in this period now, and because we're constantly informed by the media about the deteriorating American family. It's hard to get an objective view of the state of the family. Now, I think that today, most people applaud the social changes that came about in the second period of individualism. They're not willing to give up gender equality, the freedom to leave an unsuitable marriage, or the self-fulfillment of an interesting job. At the same time, most experts, if not most people, admit that children paid a high price for the social changes that took place in the second period. It was the children who spent long days in daycare or after school hours home alone while parents both worked. And it was the children who grew up with only one parent, or with step-parents in many cases. Some experts see changes occurring now in the U.S. society, changes that affect the family. They see a continuing decline in divorce rates since the 1980s, but also a decline in birth rates after an initial increase in the 1980s. The decline in divorce rates could be due to families' better financial situations. Despite the decline in divorce, a quarter of the U.S. children today live with only one parent. The birth rate is probably declining because an increasing lifespan results in fewer women of childbearing age. A more encouraging reason is the reduction in unmarried teen pregnancies. Now, experts also report an attempt by people to balance work with family obligations, especially the care of children. They see the individualism of the middle period changing somewhat. The concern seems, in many cases, to be shifting from one's career to one's family, from individualism to the new familism. The most optimistic view of this third period would be that Americans have learned from past mistakes. They want to regain the commitment to family of the first period and keep the equality and fulfillment of the second period. It won't be easy to regain the commitment to the family of the first period. It will require changes in how society and the government look at the family. In families where both parents work, one parent may try to work at home or only work part-time to have more time for the children. Places of work may offer more flexible working hours and on-site daycare to allow more time for parents and children. For its part, the government could mandate parental leave, family allowances, and quality daycare centers. Parental leave and family allowances would allow parents to stay home to look after their newborn children. Quality daycare would be adequately staffed by professionals who stay at their jobs and with the same children year after year. Now, none of these changes is guaranteed, but it seems clear that such changes or similar ones are necessary to ensure a healthier U.S. family in the future. And a healthier family is needed to play the central role that family does in every society. Now, I've gone over a lot here, but if you want to pursue the topic further, there are some references in the end of the lesson to help you do so.